How about rasterizing a vector graphic? So we know that Illustrator is a vector-based program. It's a vector drawing program. It creates vector graphics. Vector graphics, if I just look at this simple graphic here, has no pixels. So that means without pixels, we don't have to worry about resolution. So it is resolution independent. We don't have any concern for quality or the quality of what we have, because it can print at whatever the output device is capable of doing. Now we can convert our vector graphics into bitmap graphics, and that process is called rasterization. And Illustrator will do that in some cases, and we get into much more detail here down the road, but we can convert some areas. Now, if I had something like these two circles here, and let's just slide this up and we can get rid of that. I have two circles here. Let's color them, and it really does not matter. I'm going to go back to the RGB world. Doesn't really matter what I have here for colors. Let's just use a yellow and a magenta here. So if I were to select this top circle, and I do either, I'm going to go over to my panels here, and I'm looking at transparency. Again, if you can't find transparency, go under window. Remember, all of your panels are listed here. So I'll pull out transparency, because there are two pieces here that really will make Illustrator think, should I rasterize that? One is the use of blending modes. Remember, blending modes are how these two items blend together. So it's dealing with the mixing of that ink. The other area would be opacities. Let's put this back to normal. And if I change the opacity, you can see again, these two colors are blending together. Another area are those gradient meshes. Remember the meshes that we did to create some really interesting color blends. Those pieces, anywhere where you have really a blend with color, you're going to have a potential for some output issues on certain devices. So that area is where sometimes Illustrator will actually rasterize. It'll rasterize this area right here, and that's an option that we have when we go ahead and send this out for print. So if we rasterize it, it converts it to bitmap, a bitmap graphic. And a bitmap graphic is basically made up of those rectangular little grids called pixels, those little squares. A pixel actually stands for picture element. So a bitmap graphic is good for those continuous tone images. So when we do that, of course, then all of a sudden we have little boxes, and those boxes matter. Those number of pixels in a given inch is what we call resolution. Standard resolution for the web, 72 pixels per inch. Standard resolution for any professional printed work, at least 300 pixels per inch. So we have something called the effective resolution, and this is where it's the resolution of a placed image based on its size and the layout. So we can put in a raster, or what we would call bitmapped graphic, in Illustrator, something that's made up of pixels, and then Illustrator has to try to deal with that. The key thing here is don't ever place a graphic in Illustrator or in InDesign or even in Photoshop and go ahead and scale it. When you scale it to be larger, problems, red flag. The only tolerance is potentially a 10%. Anything more than increasing it by 10%, you're going to get a visible loss in quality. So a couple of other terms that we need to define here before we wrap this up. PPI, pixels per inch. That's what we call this in our raster bitmap graphics. DPI, you might hear that. DPI, dots per inch. This is really for the printing world. So there are some designers that maybe started as a graphic designer in the printing world, have morphed into the digital world, and they still call it DPI. What's the DPI of that graphic? What's the DPI that you need? It really should be called PPI. However, we have this tolerance that we accept both. So if you hear DPI in your head, think PPI. The other thing that we may hear is LPI, and that stands for lines per inch. LPI basically are lines of these halftone dots or the ink dots in a printed image that's printed professionally. So you always want to contact your printer to see what the LPI should be at. Standards around 133 to 150 LPI. Typically your PPI, your pixels per inch, for something that's going to be professionally printed should be twice the LPI, and that's where we get 300 for our PPI when we're printing at 150 for our LPI. Did you follow me with all of that? A little confusing, I know. So it just comes, you'll start learning, you'll start hearing these terms and understanding the importance of those. So one last thing back to this transparent area. Like I said, Illustrator will perform a process when we send this out to be printed. It's called flattening. It's going to isolate this overlapping area. It might rasterize, or we can actually divide this and make this be its own color. So rather than this being a certain percentage, 46% of yellow over top of this 255 color, it's going to say this part here is yellow, this part right here is a different color, and this part right here is a different color yet. So we'd have 3 different objects with 3 different colors rather than 2 objects with an overlapping shared combined color. So if you ever want to check to see how Illustrator is handling that, you can go under your View menu. And you know that you can view things in outline view. Basically, that takes all of the color information out, strips it just to your outlines. That is something you might want to do if you're fine-tuning lines or having a little bit of memory issue and Illustrator is really lagging and you need to just get your work done. You might want to go to that outline view. Preview is what we typically work in. There's an overprint preview, and so that takes you into a whole different mode that really Illustrator tries to show what this will look like when it's printed, how it adjusts for things. So there's some theory for you, general theory on some of the color that we use in Illustrator. Like I said, if you're completely confused, don't worry, it will come. And if it's the first time you've heard about some of these things, you'll hear it over and over, and it will become common language for you.